We Slavs have never liked them. And then there's the Hungarians. They speak a different language even, but look, it's Hungary, okay? And if you have to step on them, you can step on them. And then there's Slovakia. They're like us. They're Slavs, but they're weak, and they don't have the vision of great Russians. So we'd like Slovakia to come with us. And there's Poland up there. See, Warsaw? We hate the Poles. I mean, those Poles are uppity. They fought us. They defeated us in 1920. Yeah, at the gates, we were going to take Warsaw, and they beat us back. And we occupied them during World War II and afterwards. Yeah, we knew how to get rid of Poles. What we did is we let them fight against the Germans during World War II. They had a big uprising in that capital city of Warsaw. And we had our forces right there, and we stayed right there and let the Poles and the Germans fight it out for about 3 months. And after all the Poles were killed, of course, then we moved in and killed all the Germans. Yeah, we know what to do with the Poles. And by the way, at the end of World War II, we imported to Poland a couple of million Russians and told them to become Poles. And we also moved the borders because, anyway, some of that Polish land that they claim, that's really Russian land. And so all these passions, all these historical memories are at work in ferment today in Eastern Europe. And wars going on and people are afraid. I don't know if you've got any Ukrainian refugees here in Hiram. We got some in Little Rock. And they're lucky to get out. And they follow the news every day in Russian and Ukrainian. And they're praying for their families that are left there. And the families won't leave. This war has been going on since 2014 in Ukraine. But we've only really become aware of it as Americans since the 24th of February. It's an inflection point in world history. What happens here is going to decide the future of most of mankind. I'm going to say that again because I said it wrong. It's going to define the future of most of humankind. And the reason I say that is because if Russia takes Ukraine as a result of whatever, it's going to change the way the world perceives the United States, the way the world perceives international law, the way North Korea and Iran and Israel and Saudi Arabia behave. It's going to change the value of the U.S. dollar. It's going to change the American economy. It's going to produce a wave of 15, 20 million more refugees into Europe and people coming to the United States. And people will lose faith in the United States and this American dollar that you all are happy to carry in your, I don't know, maybe you all don't carry any money anymore. So I still carry $20 now and then. And it's a special thing in the world. People that aren't American, they look at our dollar, they look at this country, and they say, well, of course I love my own country and my family, and I'd never give up my own, but those Americans, they're really lucky. They don't know how good they have it. That's what they say. All of that is at risk right now in what happens in Ukraine. So what's going to happen? Okay, in war, we talk about the center of gravity. The center of gravity is the center of force, the center of power for the warring parties. What's the center of gravity in Russia? Putin. As soon as Putin gives up on this, boom, it's over. All you got to do is fix one man. What's the center of gravity for the Ukrainians? The United States. The United States political system. Right now in the United States. This election is a strategic battle being waged by Vladimir Putin. Now, I didn't come up here to be partisan, but I just want to acknowledge the Wall Street Journal headlines today said Republicans are more and more edging away from support for Ukraine. Putin knows that. That's why he wants the Republicans to win the Congress back. Because if he can stop American assistance to Ukraine, they won't last very long. And waiting in the wings is Donald Trump. I like Donald Trump personally. He's a great figure, you know. I mean, he's a fighter. He looks like what every American man wants to look like. He's 6'3". He's blonde-haired. He's blue-eyed. He has perfect genetics. He's intelligent. Just ask him. He's got really high IQ. And he doesn't have little hands, okay? Okay, and he told you that. And women are just magically attracted to him, you know? I mean, he can't help it. It's just, he's a magnetic personality. And in 2011, he would have been the most popular Republican on the ticket. Mitt Romney was second choice. But Trump couldn't run, and so Vladimir Putin really knows this. And he knows how to work this. And so you can look at the article in the New York Times that's come out over the last couple of days, where they've done extensive research on the Russian connection in the 2016 presidential election and the war in Ukraine. And I can't repeat that article, but if I were a young person today, I'd look at it very carefully, and I would certainly go to the polls and vote if you're 18. And I know I talk to some of these young people and they're 18, Mr. President. And I hope they're going to come to Howard College, because I know this is a great university. And 4 of the 5 I talked to said they were undecided. I'll give you their names out here. But the point is, look, we fought in this country for the right to vote. We didn't start this to become the greatest power in the world. We're a terrible occupational force. We couldn't handle Iraq. I knew it. I knew we put American troops in there. We wouldn't do that. I mean, the only reason we did occupation after the war in Germany is because we fraternized with the Germans. And we had a lot of people in our army who spoke German. And like I said, in World War I, well, we brought back 50,000 French brides. That's what the American Army is good for. It's good for going out, meeting people, making friends after we fight. We're not an occupying power. We didn't start out to become the greatest power in the world. But we have a certain system of government. It is a system that is self-correcting as long as the voting works. Every country makes mistakes. Every politician makes mistakes. Even Albert Einstein, well, he didn't exactly make a mistake, but he argued against himself on both sides of the same issue. I mean, nobody's perfect. But if you're in a dictatorship, it's not self-correcting. In America, it's mostly self-correcting. And people speak up and they vote, they complain, they start at the local level, they want the potholes fixed. They go to the state level, they want the state taxes reduced, or they want a better medical system or better aid to education in the state. They want pre-K schooling for kids. They go to the national level and they have their fears and their hopes. That's democracy. There's another model out there. Putin represents it. Xi Jinping represents it. It's a strong leader. It's the view that people are naturally evil, that they're self-centered, that they can't think for themselves, that they need to be held in line. And to do that, you need strong police, surveillance, cameras. My first trip to China, I met the model grandmother in Shanghai. 1983, she received an award from the Chinese Communist Party. And for that award, what she did is she stayed in this apartment with her son and his wife. It was a one-bedroom apartment, but she was there and they slept on the sofa. And they shared a kitchen with the apartment next door and a bathroom down the hall. But when everybody worked, she stayed home and she monitored who else was in the building. Was anybody hiding from work? If somebody said they were sick, were they really sick? And she reported it and wrote her, that's a police state. That's the other model to democracy. What's the future? NATO, Russia, the future of Europe and security. Well, that's the title, that's what you want me to address? That's up to you. It's really up to you. You Americans, you Ohioans, you people who can vote, you people who will decide the future of the United States government and whether or not we support Ukraine in its bid for independence. Or whether we turn our backs and say, that's too expensive, let's cut taxes for wealthy people, or some other thing like that. It's up to you. You didn't volunteer for that mission. When you were brought up by your parents, they didn't say, now, Johnny, Susan, when you grow up, you're going to have to make a really important decision about whether the United States is the greatest power in the world or whether you want to shrink back and be occupied in the future by China. No, they didn't bring it, but I'm bringing it to you. That is the obligation on you, Americans, today. I'm late in the fourth quarter. I don't know if I'm going to get a double overtime or not. But I'm only one man and one vote. There's like 300 votes in this room. There's 300 consciences who look at what's happening in Ukraine. And says, I don't want that to happen here. And I don't want to see it in Romania or Moldova or Poland. Enough's enough. You've got to do the only thing you can do. You vote. You pay attention to the news. You exercise your judgment. And that's what I fought for in Vietnam. That's what I led NATO for in the Balkans. That's what my uncle fought for in World War I. I don't think I had anybody that fought in the Civil War. I think they were all too smart. I think they ran away. But look, this country stands for something. All over the world, people look at us. And today in Europe, they're asking, what is the character of America? We always talk about human rights and freedom and dignity, and we're against torture and everything. Is it worth $1 billion to Ukraine? Well, yeah, but is it worth $2 billion? Well, that sounds like a lot of money. What about $17 billion? Is it worth $100 billion? Must be some logical thing that, there's only like 40 million people, and 40 million into 40 billion, that's like $1,000 per person. They're not worth that, are they? I mean, how do we understand this as a nation? So I don't know what the future is. It's going to be determined by you, your conscience, your vote. Next Tuesday, probably going to be rainy and cold in Harvard, Ohio. Maybe even an ice storm. It'll be hard to get to the polls, and your family's going to say you got other chores to do, and the car's not working right. You're supposed to be in the shop. Okay? But this is what we all fought for, and this is what we're about. So I want to leave it at that and tell you, I hope that this has helped you understand where we are. We're the most dangerous spot in my lifetime. It could go nuclear. If it does, we'll deal with it. It could be a Ukrainian collapse. If it does, we'll deal with that. But if it's a collapse of America, there's no fixing that. And that's on you. Thank you. I know I was being a little folksy and I was making some jokes and stuff, and don't anybody take it personal. And if you all are historians and you find out I got a date wrong, I apologize. I just wanted to try to make it personal enough so you see it for what it is. Got any veterans in here? Okay, thank you. Okay, you all. That was then, okay? Let me thank you for that. This is now. Got a bunch of people over here and in this room who might be called on. Maybe you won't be called on. Maybe your country will never need you in uniform. Hope so. But a country needs you to vote. Got to do your duty as a citizen. These veterans did their duty above and beyond the call of an ordinary citizen because they put the uniform on and risked their lives. They took a pledge to support the Constitution of the United States. They could have been sent anywhere, told to do anything at the risk of their life, and they might have lost it. Sometimes through an accident, sometimes through bad planning, sometimes through an errant mortar shell, sometimes because somebody on the other side wants to kill an American. That's the risk you take, and they did that for this country. So we honor your vets, but we're going to honor these people at Hiram for 100% turnout on voting on Tuesday.
Okay, thank you so much. We are going to go to our Q&A now, as we always do, and normally we have a Garfield Scholar or two come up and ask the first question. However, this is such a big group, and we have so many high school students here, I figured we'd start, and if any of them want to come up and ask the first question. And I
Okay, now look, I was just fooling. There really is no examination at the end of this class, okay? But I really seriously would like to know what you all are thinking, either in questions or comments. Because I'm like the honeybee, and Hiram College is like a flower. And I go and I sample the opinion here, and I use it, and I try to tell other people about it. So what's it feel like?
You don't have to do it. Okay, if you, oh, there we go. By the way, I know this because I gave a talk at Hudson the other day. This is Alice. So Alice, you just have to hit the mic button there. Yep, it's just right on top.
Is it working?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Hi. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Such a great honor to listen to everything that you had to say. I was wondering, before Russia invaded in February, there was a little bit of build up to it, right? Escalation. I was wondering, do you think diplomacy would have done more there, and is the way out through diplomacy, or does it have to be fought through war and on the battlefield for the conflict to come to an end?
Okay, so the question is there a role for diplomacy in ending this conflict in Ukraine? Okay, of course there's a role for diplomacy, because wars always have to end with some kind of settlement, unless governments just all dissolve and disappear. At the end of World War II, we got the last surviving top German admiral to sign the Declaration of Surrender. In the Pacific, General MacArthur sailed the USS Missouri into Tokyo Bay, and they brought out the Japanese warlords to sign the surrender document. But we're not at the case in Ukraine, in my opinion, where you could stop this fighting by having diplomats talk. Why is that? Well, because the Ukrainians, the more you lose, the angrier you get. And when you had your home destroyed, and your wife's been killed, or your baby's been killed, I know, Jesus teaches us to turn the other cheek. And I know there's a lot of good Christians here. And I'm a Christian. And I certainly don't have revenge in my heart. But I'll just tell you what human nature is, because I've seen it in Eastern Europe. When family members are killed, there's going to be revenge, and people don't forget it. In Bosnia, in former Yugoslavia, over here, in 1990, Serb children were playing with Muslim children in the town of Foča. And a grandmother said to her grandson, "You can play with little Ivan, but never forget that his grandfather killed your grandfather." I was at the Ukrainian Congress 5 years ago in Washington, D.C. They bring Americans in, see members of, they bring them in, they have a cocktail party, they see people from Congress, they get spoken to, and you know, it's the way interest groups work in America. And these three Ukrainian women at the cocktail party, I met them. They were in their 40s. They were married. They were from Minnesota. They were married to Americans, all of them. They'd come out of Ukraine when they were like teenagers in the early 1990s after the breakup of the Soviet Union. They all had kids. But they decided, hey, let's take a winter vacation. Let's go to Washington, D.C. We're all Ukrainians. Let's hear what the latest thing, and we can even speak Ukrainian to each other. So they left the sublime Minnesota winter and came to Washington, D.C. They're at the cocktail party. They're getting the briefing on everything. And I'm listening to them right beside them as they're talking. They said, they're taking our land. We must fight. We must fight for our land. I'm like, excuse me, ladies. Now, sorry to overhear this, but who's going to fight? Are you going to fight? Well, no. But who's going to do the fighting? Is it going to be your children here in Minnesota? Well, no, not our children. But they want to fight. This is not like American women, I'm sorry to say. I'm not insulting anybody, but, you know, my picture of American women is, I was really good friends with former Texas Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, and my wife worked with her as a volunteer, and Kay was a cheerleader in Texas, and she was a broadcaster, and, you know, she's a really nice woman. I brought her to Sarajevo at her request in 1997, and she met the widows of some of the survivors of this massacre that occurred in 1995, where the Serb army overran an encampment, and they separated the men from the women, and they killed like 7,000 men and tried to bury them and everything. And these were some of the survivors. And so Kay met them a couple of years later in Sarajevo at the home of the U.S. ambassador there. And she circulated amongst them, and then she gave them her pet talk, you know. It's like the way you do it in Texas. Like, yeah, it wasn't good. It was a terrible thing that happened. But, you know, you're here, and you've got to face the future. And we want you to you know, have good lives and look ahead to the things you can do. And she finished, and this woman from Eastern Bosnia said, Senator, 5 years ago, I was married. I had 2 sons. I was a teacher. I had a home, a car, and a vacation home. She said, today, I have nothing. My husband was killed. My sons were killed. My homes were destroyed in the fighting. I have nothing. She said, and I will not forget. And I will not forgive. That's what's going on in Ukraine right now. So diplomacy, maybe later, but it's not going to happen right now. You just can't get it stopped. Putin won't leave, and Ukraine won't stop. There's this really stupid conversation from some Russian guy that was quoted in the press the other day. He said, well, he said, of course we want the Ukrainians to like us and admit us, but if they won't, we're going to bomb them, and if they don't like us, then we're going to destroy them. Okay, well, that's a great way to make friends. Bomb them. Yeah, and then they'll really like you. That's the Russian mentality that's coming through in this. So it's too early for diplomacy. I think the United States should state the terms of a diplomatic agreement, and I think we should state it now. I don't think we can afford to just support the Ukrainians, and I think the terms of diplomacy should be this. Number 1, Russia leaves. Lock, stock, and barrel from all Ukrainian land. Number 2, Russia accounts for all the abducted, the children that have been seized and so forth and taken away, and all the mass graves. Number 3, Russia participates in resolving war crimes investigations. And number 4, Russia pays reparations. After that, now that's when the fighting stops. After that, then we can decide, is Ukraine going to be a member of NATO? Are there going to be security guarantees? Is Russia going to have to pull its forces back 100 miles away from any borders with Western Europe? Is there going to be an inspection team that goes through Russia and makes sure they're not rearming? I mean, but that's for the diplomats to argue. I think those 4 conditions are irreducible.
Yeah.
next question from Rick Eason's board member.
Welcome, General Clark, and thank you for being here, and thank you for your service and your patriotism. I was a high school student once, I think it was the last century, but I'll just take the next question if I may, and that is, along the lines of what you were just articulating in terms of an agreement, how should foreign entities outside of Russia, such as Iran and North Korea, also be included in that agreement because their influence has been growing militarily? And then as a second backup question regarding Iran, are we engaging once again in willful ignorance, willful blindness towards the cultural movements that risen back in 2014, the Green Revolution, and now with the morality police rounding up thousands of people who are demonstrating in the name of self-determination and freedom and the right to pursue a life? What should this administration do? What would you do if you were in control in terms of handling that cultural phenomenon right now?
Okay. The thrust of the question is, it's not just about Ukraine, but there's a lot of other trouble on the horizon, Iran, North Korea, etc. And somehow we have to come to terms with all this. So, a little perspective. In 2002, in his State of the Union address, President George W. Bush defined an axis of evil. He said it was North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. So I just got out of the military, I had access to highest levels, and I'm like, what is an axis of evil? What is this? I mean, Iraq and Iran hate each other, and they're not having anything to do with North Korea anyway. But sure enough, after we said it, they kind of joined up, and the Iranians and North Koreans, yeah, they like each other pretty much now because they realize we lump them all together and hate them. And the speechwriter for George W. Bush later admitted, well, there really wasn't any axis, but I thought it just sounded good in the speech. Honestly. And that's how foreign policy can be made and mistakenly made. And so it was North Korea that was closest to having a nuclear weapon, followed by Iran, but we invaded Iraq. Go figure. So here the problem is that Russia has reached out and signed a strategic cooperation agreement with Iran. And it's using Iran, not only their weapons, but it will be importing high-tech components for its own military from using the Iranian smuggling system, which has been pretty sophisticated, pretty well developed. Lots of Iranian agents in places like Germany, Japan, and so forth, to be able to pick up high-quality computers, chips, and the other things that the Russians need. So they're using this. And the Iranians like it because they're going to get a battlefield test, because they think that the Russians can help them get through Syria to go after the Israelis, and the Iranians are looking for a big brother because they're worried about Mohammed bin Salman. He's a wild card in Saudi Arabia. He's young, he's somewhat capricious, he's full of energy, and he doesn't like Iran that much. And also they're having trouble with Turkey. Turkey wants to reassert the Ottoman Empire. Now, Mohammed bin Salman doesn't want that exactly. The Lebanese don't want it. The Armenians certainly don't want it. And the Iranians don't want it. So there's a real stew pot of difficulties over there. And this alignment between Iran and Russia is distressing. But also distressing is the fact that Israel is not supporting Ukraine. They're in exactly the same position, but they say, no, we have Russia and Syria. That's like our northern neighbor, so therefore we can't help Ukraine. And I'm like to the Israelis, well, tell the Russians to leave Syria. You'll never have a better opportunity. And they say, well, that would mean more Iranians would come into Syria, and they're worse. So there's a lot of uncertainties in this. But I think one thing's clear right now, we're probably not going to be able to reinstitute the Iranian nuclear agreement. It just doesn't look like it's in the cards. We've tried, this administration tried really hard. They even called me and said, would you write an op-ed in favor